I was born behind the kennels, where the air always smelled of wet fur, iron chains and raw meat. Some folks are born in houses, wrapped in blankets or cradled by mothers. I was born in a pen, surrounded by snarling hounds whose growls were my first lullaby. My name is Simon, though for most of my life it didn't mean much. To my master, I was the boy. To the overseer, I was that kennel hand. To the dogs, I was something between their feeder and their kin. I never knew my mother for long. They said she worked the fields before the fever took her. All I remember of her is a humming voice that used to float over the fence when I was small. When that voice disappeared, so did the last piece of softness in my world. After that, it was just me, the dogs, and the man who owned both. Master Wexler was known across the county for his hounds. He'd ride out every few weeks leading a pack that could tear through the woods like wind and thunder. The white men called it sport. We knew it as terror. They didn't just chase foxes or deer. Sometimes they hunted folks who ran, and when they caught them, they didn't stop when the screams began. My job was to feed those beasts, clean their pens, and keep them sharp for the next hunt. I was only 6 when I started. The first time I carried a bucket of scraps to the kennel, my hands shook so bad I spilled blood all over my feet. The dogs came at me fast, teeth flashing, eyes burning, but I didn't run. I just stood there, trembling, whispering the first words that came to my lips. Easy now, easy. They stopped. Maybe they saw something in me, fear, maybe kindness, maybe both. From that day on, they listened when I spoke. The dogs were all I had. I learned their moods, their growls, their silences. There was Duke, the old black hound with one eye who'd been around longer than me. There was Lily, a pale one with spots like rain. And then there was Red, the meanest of them all, a beast that would lunge at any man who came too close. But he never bit me, not once. I could lay my hand on his head and feel his heart slow under my touch. Sometimes at night I'd sneak scraps of bread from the kitchen and sit with them under the moonlight. They'd lie around me in a circle, their heavy bodies pressing close, their breathing warm and steady. It was the only time I felt safe, wrapped in the rhythm of creatures that the world feared as monsters. I guess I was one of them. Master Wexler didn't care much for me, except when the dogs looked strong. He'd nod at me sometimes, the way a man might nod at a well-made tool. Once, he even said, "That boy's got the devil's whisper. Dogs mind him better than they do me." Everyone laughed. I didn't. The hounds were his pride. He treated them better than most of us. They had names, collars, soft straw to sleep on. We had numbers, rags, and mud floors. When one of the dogs got sick, the master called the doctor. When a slave got sick, he called the whip. I used to wonder if God saw it all. Aunt Cora, an old woman from the quarters, said he did. She'd bring me scraps of food sometimes and tell me stories in whispers. "Simon," she said once, "them beasts got more heart than the man who owns them. But don't you forget, beasts remember who feeds them." I didn't know what she meant back then, but her words stayed inside me like a seed buried deep. There was one morning that sticks in my mind. The sky was still dark when Master Wexler came down with his hunting guests. They were laughing, drinking, ready to ride. I'd been up all night brushing the hounds, checking their paws, filling their water. When the gates opened, the dogs surged forward, barking like thunder. Wexler turned to me and said, "If one of them dogs falters, boy, you'll take its place." I nodded, but something inside me twisted, because I knew he meant it. As the years passed, I grew taller, stronger. The dogs grew older too. Some died. New ones came. The hunts never stopped. I saw things I wish I could forget, bodies dragged back, torn and lifeless, blood dripping from muzzles I had kissed only hours before. The men cheered. I stood silent, scrubbing the stains from the kennel floor. There was a night once, when the moon hung red and swollen, and the dogs were restless. They wouldn't eat. They paced and growled, their eyes wild. I went inside their pen, and Red snapped near my face. But instead of fear, I felt something else, an understanding. The world had made them cruel, the same way it had made me quiet. I whispered to them, "You didn't choose this either." The wind carried my words, and for a moment, everything went still. The hounds sat, heads low, as if listening. That was the first time I realized we weren't so different, the beasts and the slaves. Both trapped, both fed to serve the same master. When the rains came that year, the plantation turned to mud. The dogs howled through the nights, hungry and restless. I worked until my hands cracked, hauling buckets, mending fences, but the thing that hurt most wasn't the work, it was the sound of the whip. I'd hear it slice through the air from the fields, followed by screams that didn't stop until silence took them. Sometimes when the hounds barked too loud, it drowned out the cries. I think that's why the master loved them so much. They were the music that covered his sins. One evening, I stood by the kennel watching the sunset turn the sky orange. Duke limped beside me, old and tired. I ran my hand along his fur and whispered, "One day, we'll both be free, old boy." I didn't know what freedom meant, not really. I'd never seen it. But I liked the way the word felt on my tongue, like something clean, untouched by dirt or blood. That night, as I lay in my straw bed, I thought of Aunt Cora's words again. Beasts remember who feeds them. I closed my eyes, listening to the hounds breathing in their pens, and something deep inside me stirred a thought so faint I almost feared it. What if one day I fed them something they weren't meant to eat? The idea came and went like a shadow, but it left a mark. I told myself it was just a thought, just a whisper. But whispers have a way of growing louder in the dark. And that's how my story began behind those kennels, between the growl of beasts and the silence of men. I was the boy who fed the hounds. I was the hand they trusted. And every night I wondered what would happen if that hand ever trembled for the wrong reason. I fed them every day of my life, until the night I fed them something else. I used to think the kennels were the worst place a soul could live. But when I grew older and the overseer started sending me beyond those wooden fences, I learned there were darker corners on that land, places where even the dogs went quiet. The Wexler plantation stretched as far as the eye could see. Fields of cotton rolled over the hills like waves, white and endless, but there was no beauty in it. The stalks stood like bones, and between those rows, bent figures moved, men, women, and children, picking until their fingers bled. The sun cooked our backs, the whip sang over the fields, and the air smelled of sweat and dust. That was the world I was born into. The kennel had kept me apart from most of the others. I'd see them sometimes when I went to fetch scraps or water. They looked at me differently, some with pity, others with distance. To them, I was the dog boy, half slave, half creature. Maybe they weren't wrong. I had grown so used to barking and growling that words sometimes felt strange in my mouth. But one evening, when the sun dipped low and the fields shimmered with heat, I saw something that changed me. The overseer, Mr. Crenshaw, had caught an old man slowing down. His name was Jonah, a kind soul who used to sneak me boiled peanuts when I passed the fields. Crenshaw didn't say a word. He just raised his whip. The crack tore through the air. Jonah fell, then rose again, his back torn open, but Crenshaw didn't stop. He swung until Jonah stopped moving altogether. Then he called for me. "Boy," he barked, "bring the dogs." I froze. I wanted to say no, to run, to do anything but obey. But my feet carried me toward the kennels like they always did. My hands reached for the leashes, my mouth called the names Duke, Red, Lily. They came, tails low, eyes confused. I led them to the field. Crenshaw pointed to Jonah's body. "Let him smell what happens when a nigger forgets his work." My stomach twisted. The dogs whined. They didn't understand. I whispered, "No, not this time." But Crenshaw's whip cracked again, this time across my back. "Do it," he shouted. I knelt beside the body, tears burning my eyes, and whispered to the hounds, "Stay." They obeyed. Crenshaw cursed and kicked at them, but they didn't move. That night I learned that obedience could be stronger than hate, and I swore deep down that one day I'd make these beasts remember who their true master was. After that day, Master Wexler kept a closer eye on me. He liked that the dogs followed my every word, but it unsettled him too. I could see it in his eyes, the unease of a man who senses his control slipping in small, invisible ways. He started calling me to the big house more often, ordering me to clean boots or fetch wine. I didn't mind the work, but the smell of that place, it was the smell of power and rot mixed together. The walls were lined with paintings of hunts, men on horseback chasing down foxes or deer. But I knew those hunts were lies. The dogs didn't just chase animals, they chased people, our people. Sometimes when the guests came for supper, I'd hear them laugh about it. "Fine sport," they'd say. "These hounds can smell a runaway a mile away." Those words sank deep. Each time the rage inside me grew. I didn't show it, of course. A slave learns early that silence is his only shield. But inside I was a storm waiting for thunder. Aunt Cora saw it. She always saw things others missed. She worked in the kitchen and sometimes slipped me bits of cornbread. Her eyes, old and tired, studied me one evening when I came to fetch scraps for the dogs. "That fire in you, boy," she said softly. "Don't let it burn you before it lights the way." I didn't answer, but her words stayed in my head. I didn't know yet what they meant. The days blurred into one another, feeding, cleaning, obeying. But the nights were worse. I'd lie awake listening to the cries from the punishment yard. That was the true heart of Wexler's land, the place where screams replaced music, where pain was a language everyone understood. Once, I saw something I can never unsee. A young woman had tried to run. They caught her near the swamp and dragged her back. Wexler ordered the hounds out, and I had to stand by, leash in hand. He said, "Let them learn their duty." The dogs looked to me, waiting for command. My lips trembled. My heart begged to disobey, but fear won. I released them. They lunged. The sound that followed wasn't human. The men cheered. Wexler laughed, and I turned my head away, tears burning down my face. After that night, I stopped speaking for days. The dogs wouldn't eat unless I was near. Maybe they sensed what I felt: guilt, confusion, something darker. I hated them and I loved them all at once. They were my curse and my comfort. One afternoon, Wexler brought his son home from school. Eli Wexler. He was younger than his father, but meaner in spirit. His eyes had the same cold shine as polished steel. He looked me up and down, then grinned. "So this is the famous dog whisperer," he said. "Let's see how well he bleeds." He didn't need a reason. None of them did. He swung his whip across my back just to see me flinch. The dogs barked furiously, pulling at their chains. That only made him laugh harder. "See, father," he said, "even your beasts pity the boy." That night, Eli came to the kennels drunk. He kicked open the gate, shouting, "Wake up, you mongrels." The dogs growled. I stepped between him and them. "They don't like strangers," I warned. "Then let's make them like me," he sneered, grabbing one by the collar. Red lunged, teeth flashing, but I shouted his name sharp and loud, and the hound froze midair. Eli's grin faltered. "How'd you do that?" I said nothing. He stared at me for a long time, then spat on the ground. "You think they love you, boy? They're just dogs. Feed them long enough and they'll eat you too." When he left, I sat among the hounds, shaking. I could still feel the sting of his words, the way they cut deeper than the whip. Maybe he was right. Maybe loyalty was just hunger wearing another face. But as I stroked Duke's fur, I whispered, "No, you ain't like them." The dog rested his head on my lap, sighing softly. For the first time in years, I prayed not for freedom, but for understanding. The world outside the kennels kept spinning in cruelty. Each sunrise brought more whippings, more death. And yet, through it all, I fed the hounds. I cleaned their wounds. I whispered their names, because I knew something the Wexlers didn't. Beasts remember every bite of meat, every gentle hand, every whispered word. It all stays somewhere inside them. Just like pain stays inside us. It doesn't vanish. It waits. And though I didn't know when or how, I began to feel that one day, the waiting would end. For now, I was still their boy, the slave, who lived among beasts. But deep down, I was beginning to understand the truth Aunt Cora had seen long ago. The same chains that bound me to those dogs might one day be the same chains that set me free. By the time I turned 15, I had learned how to move without being seen, how to listen without being caught, and how to survive without breaking. Life on the Wexler plantation had a way of grinding down a man's soul until nothing but obedience was left. But deep inside me, under all that obedience, something else had begun to stir, something sharp, quiet, and alive. Eli Wexler had returned home for good that year. His father's back had grown crooked with age, and he wanted his son to take over the business. Eli was eager, too eager. He had the kind of cruelty that didn't need a reason. It was a habit, a pleasure. Where his father punished to control, Eli punished to entertain. He started spending more time near the kennels, pretending to admire the hounds. I could tell he didn't care for them like his father did. He liked the way they frightened people, not the animals themselves. Sometimes he'd drag visitors down just to show off how they snarled on command. But the truth was, the dogs didn't obey him the way they obeyed me. They would growl when he came close, their ears flattening, their bodies stiff. It made him furious. "Damn beasts," he'd mutter, kicking at the fences. Then he'd look at me with that mean grin of his. Maybe they just need a better lesson in loyalty. One morning, he ordered me to bring the dogs to the yard. I thought it was for another hunt. Instead, he had a runaway woman tied to a post. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with mud and blood. I didn't know her name, but I recognized her eyes wide, trembling, full of a kind of fear that still had hope left in it. Eli looked at me and said, "You're going to help me teach them." I didn't answer. My hands shook as I held the leashes. He pulled out his whip and snapped it near the dogs' faces. They barked wildly, confused and frightened. The woman screamed. Eli laughed. "Let's see if your little friends here remember their job." He reached for the gate latch, but I stepped in front of him. "Sir, the dogs, they ain't meant for this. They'll turn wild." He stared at me for a long moment, then smiled that slow, dangerous smile. You trying to tell me how to train my own hounds? No, sir, I whispered, my eyes on the ground. Good, he said, because you're about to find out what happens when a boy forgets his place. He struck me across the face with the whip so hard I tasted blood. I fell to my knees, the leashes slipping from my hands. The dogs barked and strained, but I shouted their names: Duke, Lily, Red, and they froze, torn between fury and obedience. Eli laughed again, louder this time. Look at that. They really are your pets, aren't they? Maybe I ought to break them by breaking you. He swung again. This time the whip curled around my shoulder, tearing skin. I heard myself scream, but the sound didn't feel like it came from me. Something inside me snapped, not just from pain, but from the way he looked at me, like I wasn't even human. The dogs went wild. Red lunged so hard the leash burned my palms. For a second I thought he'd break free, but I held him back. I didn't know why. Maybe because I knew if he attacked, Eli would kill him, and all the others too. See, boy, Eli sneered. They're just animals. You think they care about you? They'd tear you apart if I told them to. He turned toward the woman and raised his whip again. My stomach twisted. I wanted to close my eyes, to disappear, but I couldn't look away. The hounds were trembling, whining, their instincts fighting their training. They knew something was wrong. Eli cracked the whip, and in that moment, something happened. Duke, the oldest of the hounds, snapped the leather in his jaws. The whip fell from Eli's hand. He stumbled back, startled. The dogs barked louder, teeth bared, but still they didn't move. They looked at me instead. I stood there, blood dripping from my chin, my breath ragged. Eli's face turned red with rage. You trained them to defy me, he shouted. No, sir, I said quietly. They just know who they trust. He struck me again, over and over, until my vision blurred. When he finally stopped, he spat on the ground. Next time I'll make them eat from your bones. He stormed off, leaving me there in the dirt. The dogs pressed close, whining softly, licking my hands as if to apologize. I wanted to hate them for not attacking, for not saving her, for not saving me. But how could I? They were just like me, taught to obey, punished when they didn't. The woman didn't survive that day. They buried her near the edge of the fields. That night, I sat beside the kennel, my back bandaged, my heart burning. Aunt Cora found me there. She knelt beside me, her wrinkled hands trembling as she touched my cheek. What did he do this time? She asked. I told her everything. She listened without a word, her eyes dark and wet. When I finished, she said softly, The Lord don't sleep, Simon. One day, every whip that tore your back gone come down on theirs. I don't want the Lord to do it, I whispered. I want to. She looked at me long and hard. Be careful what you feed your soul, child. Vengeance eats like hunger, it never gets full. But I was already full of something else, something bitter and deep. Weeks passed, but the wounds on my back didn't heal right. The scars twisted like roots. Every time I bent to feed the dogs, they ached. Eli made sure I never forgot that day. He'd laugh whenever he saw me limp and say, Guess the dogs didn't love you that much after all. But I saw the truth in their eyes. When they looked at me, there was something there, guilt, anger, maybe love. They remembered. Then came the night of the storm. The wind howled through the trees, rain lashing against the kennels. Eli came down drunk again, bottle in hand, stumbling, cursing at the thunder. You still whisper to them mutts, boy, he slurred. Let's see if they'll listen when I'm done with you. He opened the gate, shouting, waving the bottle. The dogs barked, uneasy. I stepped forward. Sir, please, it ain't safe. He shoved me aside and swung the bottle at Red. It shattered on the fence, glass slicing the air. Red lunged forward, growling, his teeth inches from Eli's arm before I shouted his name again. The hound froze, trembling. Eli's eyes went wide. You see that? He hissed. He wanted to kill me. You trained him to. Before I could answer, he punched me hard in the gut, knocking me down. He grabbed the chain that hung by the kennel door and wrapped it around my wrist, yanking me close. You think you control them? He snarled. You ain't nothing but their food. He dragged me through the mud, laughing. I looked up at the sky, rain mixing with blood, and in that moment, something inside me hardened like iron. He left me there, chained by the gate until morning. The dogs whined all night, pawing at the dirt. By sunrise, I was still alive, but the Simon who had bowed his head, who had whispered obedience, was gone. The new Simon stared at the world with open eyes and a quiet promise burning in his chest. They had fed me pain all my life, but one day soon, I would feed it back to them. The winter after that storm changed everything on the Harding plantation. The air itself felt heavier, soaked in secrets that nobody dared speak aloud. Every step across the frozen ground echoed too loudly, every whisper carried too far. Even the hounds seemed different, quieter, more watchful, as if they too had begun to understand that something dark was brewing among the living. I had stopped being a boy long before that winter. My hands were hard, my back was a map of scars, and my mind no longer dreamed of freedom, it calculated it. Every command, every insult, every cruel laugh from Jasper or his father became a number in a long equation that only I knew the answer to. But revenge doesn't come easy to a man without power, so I learned patience. I made myself small, useful, invisible. I cleaned the kennels before dawn, fed the dogs with steady hands, and kept my head down whenever Ernest or Jasper passed by. To them, I was a quiet shadow, a tool too valuable to destroy. But inside, I was sharpening myself with every sunrise. Adelaide's return had thrown the plantation into chaos. Her soft voice carried ideas that rattled the walls of the big house. I'd see her standing by the veranda sometimes, staring at the fields with a look that didn't belong there, a look of sorrow, not pride. She'd speak kindly to the slaves, ask questions about their work, their food, their families. At first, we didn't know what to make of it. No white woman had ever spoken to us like that. One afternoon, she came to the kennels while I was washing the feeding troughs. The smell of iron and wet fur hung heavy in the air. She watched me for a while before saying softly, "They say you're the only one who can touch them without getting bitten." I didn't look up. "They just know my scent, miss. They trust you," she said, stepping closer. "That's rare in this place." I finally met her eyes. They weren't like her father's, hard and empty. Hers carried something fragile, something dangerous. Compassion. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am," I said. "Your father wouldn't like it." She smiled faintly. "He doesn't like much about me these days." Then she noticed the scars on my wrist where the chain had bitten deep months ago. Her smile faded. "Did my father do that?" I said nothing. Silence was safer. She looked at me for a long time before whispering, "No one deserves this." Then she turned and walked away, her white dress brushing the dirt as she went. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in my head, mixing with my mother's voice, my sister's screams, and the howls of the hounds in the dark. For the first time, I wondered what it must feel like to be free, not to run, not to hide, but to breathe without fear. But freedom, for me, had taken a different shape. It wasn't escape, it was revenge. When Ernest and Jasper left for Charleston, the air in the plantation loosened just enough to breathe. Linus Garrett took over daily duties, walking around with that swagger of a man who liked being feared. But Garrett wasn't as sharp as he thought. He drank too much and bragged even more. And men who brag forget to listen. That was the winter I started building my plan for real. I began by changing the dogs' diet slowly, carefully, not to weaken them, but to make them depend on me alone. I'd mix their food with herbs Aunt Cora taught me about. Things that sharpened their senses, made their minds clearer. Over weeks, they stopped responding to Garrett's calls, even when he tried to use the scent cloths. They'd look to me instead, waiting for my voice, my signal. It wasn't disobedience, it was devotion. At night, I trained them differently. No more chasing rabbits or squirrels. I'd lead them through the woods, teaching them to move silent, to track without barking. I whispered new commands, old words from my mother's tongue that the Hardings didn't know. To them, it would sound like nonsense, but to the hounds, it became gospel. By February, I had turned them into something else, something no white man could control. And then came Adelaide again. She started visiting the quarters, bringing small comforts, scraps of bread, bits of cloth, even soap. The other slaves didn't know what to think. Some feared her kindness was a trick. Others said maybe the Lord had finally touched a Harding heart, but I saw the danger in her sympathy. The Hardings would never allow her compassion to grow unchecked, and I knew the day would come when she'd pay for it. One cold evening, I was feeding the hounds when I heard her voice behind me. "Simon," she said softly. My name on her tongue felt strange, like a word not meant to be spoken aloud by someone like her. "Miss Adelaide," I said, turning. "I've been thinking about something," she began. If someone wanted to leave this place, truly leave, could they?" Her eyes searched mine, desperate, trembling. I hesitated. "Ain't no leaving here without blood, ma'am." She looked down, nodding slowly. "That's what I thought." Then, after a pause, she added, "I wish I could take you with me." Those words struck like a blade between my ribs. I wanted to laugh. Take me with her? The daughter of the man who owned my soul? But something in her tone made me stop. She wasn't pretending. She meant it. "Why would you do that?" I asked quietly. "Because you don't belong here," she said. "No one does." Before I could answer, footsteps crunched behind her. "Garrett." "Miss Adelaide," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Your father said you shouldn't be around these animals or their keeper." Her face tightened. "Mr. Garrett, I'm not a child." He smirked. "Maybe not, but a lady's reputation is delicate." He looked at me, his eyes narrow. "You best remember your place, boy." She turned on him, fury flashing in her eyes. "Don't you ever speak to him that way again." Garrett's face twisted. For a moment I thought he might strike her. Then he smiled thinly. "Of course, miss. As you wish." He watched her walk away, and when she was gone he leaned close to me and hissed, "You think she cares about you? You're just her little charity project. When her daddy gets back, I'll make sure he knows exactly how much time she's been spending down here." He spat at my feet and walked off. That night I sat by the kennel fire, my fists clenched so tight that the nails drew blood. I didn't know whether I was angrier at him for his words or at myself for letting them sink in. Because the truth was, he wasn't entirely wrong. I'd started to care about her too. Not the way a man loves a woman, but the way a dying man looks at a patch of blue sky and remembers what hope feels like. Hope, I reminded myself, was poison, so I buried it deep. The days dragged on. The Hardings' return was only weeks away. Adelaide's kindness became rarer, her visits shorter. I could tell she sensed the walls closing in. Garrett watched her constantly, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I watched him. Every movement, every drink he took, every key he carried, I memorized them all. One night, I slipped into the main yard and tested the locks on the tool shed where the hunting rifles were kept. I knew how to handle one, had watched Jasper and his father use them enough times. But a gunshot would bring too much attention. I needed something quieter. My eyes drifted to the kennels. The hounds stirred, sensing my presence. Their breath came in soft white clouds in the cold air. I knelt down, whispering their names. Soon, I told them. Real soon. In the distance, thunder rolled low across the sky. The same kind that had rumbled the night my mother died. It felt like a promise from the heavens, one I meant to keep. Because I wasn't just a slave anymore. I was a storm waiting to break. The night before the blood moon rose over the Harding plantation, the world went still in a way I'd never felt before. Even the crickets stopped singing. The trees stood silent, their branches bare like bones pointing toward heaven. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That evening, I sat outside the kennels sharpening the old feeding knife until its edge gleamed like a silver whisper. The hounds lay around me in the dirt, quiet and watchful. They could sense it too, something shifting, something dangerous rising in the air. For years I had fed them scraps and bones, cleaned their filth, and listened to their howls in the dark. They had been my only company, my only witnesses. But that night I didn't see beasts. I saw brothers bound by chains of a different kind. I whispered their names: Brutus, Shade, Mercy, and Cain. 4 hounds, each one bred for hunting men like me. But now, they were mine. The moon was supposed to turn red the next night, the kind the elders called a blood moon. Aunt Cora said it was a sign the night when spirits walked and justice could cross the veil. I didn't believe in signs anymore. But deep down, something about that night felt meant for me. That day, Adelaide came to the kennels one last time. I was fixing a broken latch when I heard her footsteps. She looked different, tired, pale, her hair tied back loosely. Her eyes darted to the house and then back to me. "Simon," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." I stood still, my hands trembling slightly. "What is it, ma'am?" "My father sent word. He'll be home by tomorrow evening." Her voice cracked on the last word. I knew what that meant. Ernest Harding would bring his fury back with him, and if Garrett had told him even half of what he'd seen between her and me, there would be no mercy for either of us. "Then you should stay away from here," I said. "Stay inside the house till he cools down." She shook her head. "You don't understand. He's planning something. I overheard him in his letter to Garrett. He said, 'Clean the kennels before the hunt.'" Her voice broke. "He means you, Simon. He's going to make an example of you." I felt a cold wave crawl through my chest, but I didn't flinch. "Let him try." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, you could run tonight. The marsh road is clear. If you go before sundown, you might make it to the river." I looked at her for a long time. She really believed I could just disappear into the night and find freedom waiting on the other side. But there was no freedom for me out there, only dogs like mine, trained to tear men apart. "No, miss," I said quietly. "I ain't running." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Then what will you do?" I didn't answer. Some truths are too heavy to speak. She searched my face as if trying to read the thoughts buried beneath it. Then she whispered, "Whatever you're planning, please don't lose what's left of your soul." I wanted to tell her that I'd lost my soul long ago, the night my mother's screams were drowned by thunder and hound howls. But instead I said, "You best go before someone sees you here." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pressed something into my hand, a small silver cross on a thin chain. "Keep it," she said. "Maybe it'll remind you that not all of us are like them." Her eyes lingered on mine one last time before she turned and disappeared into the fog. That cross burned in my palm for a long time before I slipped it into my pocket. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the shutters, carrying whispers from the trees. I sat by the kennel fire, watching the flames lick at the wood, thinking about what waited on the other side of dawn. Garrett had been drinking harder than usual lately. Every night his laughter carried from the big house down to the quarters, mean and ugly. I knew he'd be at his weakest soon. I ran my hand over Brutus's head, feeling the coarse fur beneath my fingers. His eyes met mine, calm and waiting. "Tomorrow," I murmured, "tomorrow you'll eat what you've been denied." The fire crackled, throwing shadows against the wooden walls. For a moment I saw faces in the smoke, my mother, my sister, all the souls swallowed by this cursed land. I didn't know if they'd bless me or curse me for what I meant to do. Just before dawn, I walked to the well and washed my hands in the freezing water. The sky was still black, but the edge of the world was beginning to pale. I looked toward the horizon and whispered, "If there's a God, he's been sleeping too long." That morning passed in slow motion. I did my chores as usual, fed the hogs, swept the yard, and fetched wood for the kitchen. No one suspected a thing. Garrett was too busy barking orders, puffed up like a rooster, and the other slaves moved like ghosts, avoiding his temper. By midday, I saw Adelaide standing at the window, her face pale as milk. She looked down at me, and for a second, our eyes met. I gave her the faintest nod. She turned away, her hand covering her mouth. In the afternoon, I started preparing the Hounds' meal. But this time it wasn't just scraps. I mixed in something else, a powder Aunt Cora had once shown me. She called it sleeping death. Used right, it could slow a heart or stop it completely. But I didn't use enough to kill, just enough to make the dogs slow for everyone else but me. When Garrett came by to check, he found everything normal. "They better be ready for tomorrow," he said, swaying slightly. "Master Harding's got a taste for blood when he comes back." "They'll be ready," I said. He sneered, leaning closer. "You know, I always wondered what'd happen if them dogs got a whiff of you when they was hungry." I met his gaze without blinking. "Maybe you'd find out." He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and stumbled off toward the big house. That evening, the sky bled red. The blood moon had come early. Its light spilled across the fields like a wound that wouldn't close. As the slaves gathered quietly in the quarters, whispering prayers, I stood by the kennels with the hounds. They sat in a half circle, their eyes reflecting the red glow like living embers. I whispered to them, my voice steady and low. "You've been hungry long enough. Tomorrow night, you'll feed, but not on scraps." Brutus tilted his head, understanding. Shade growled softly, tail twitching. That night, I stayed awake beside them, watching the moon rise higher. My mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. There was no fear left in me, only a calm certainty. Because by the time the next sun set, the Hardings would learn what it felt like to be hunted. And I, Simon, the slave who fed their hounds, would finally feed them something else. The next morning began with a silence that didn't feel right. Not the peaceful kind, no. This was the silence before something breaks. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with clouds that looked ready to fall. Even the hounds were restless, pacing behind their pens with low, uneasy growls. They could smell it, the storm in men's hearts. Ernest Harding had returned. You could hear his voice before you saw him, booming across the yard like thunder rolling through bone. "Where's that damned boy?" he barked. Boots stomped through the mud, horses snorted, and the air filled with the sharp scent of tobacco and arrogance. From my place near the kennels, I saw them ride in Ernest in his dark coat and wide-brimmed hat, Jasper beside him smirking like a wolf. Behind them came Garrett, swaggering like he owned the air itself. Adelaide rode last, her face pale, her eyes distant. She looked like she'd seen her own grave and decided to walk toward it anyway. The moment Ernest dismounted, the plantation froze. Every slave stopped what they were doing, heads bowed, eyes to the dirt. "Garrett," he thundered. "You said the hounds were in prime shape for hunting." Garrett puffed out his chest. "Yes, sir. Been trained harder than ever." Ernest's eyes swept the yard before landing on me. "And the boy?" Garrett smirked. "Still here, sir. He's been taking care of them just fine." Ernest took a slow step toward me, boots sinking into the mud. His breath smelled like whiskey and hate. "You've been a quiet one, haven't you?" he said, his tone mocking. Never caused trouble, never ran. Makes a man wonder if you even got fire in you. I kept my eyes down. Just do my work, sir. He chuckled, the sound like gravel. We'll see about that. I'm planning a hunt tonight. The dogs need to stretch, and I reckon it's time to test their loyalty. My heart thudded once, hard. Yes, sir. He leaned close, his voice dropping low. You'll be part of it. I looked up, and for a moment I saw it in his eyes, the thrill of cruelty, the hunger to see fear. Part of it, sir. Oh, not the fun part. He sneered. You'll run, just far enough to give them a good chase. Garrett says they like your scent. Jasper laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. That's right, Pa. Let's see how good the mutts are at finding their favorite nigger. The slaves nearby flinched, but no one spoke. Adelaide's lips parted, her face twisting in horror. Father, you can't. Quiet, girl, Ernest roared. You think you can lecture me about dogs and slaves? You've been soft too long. She froze, her hands trembling. I could see tears in her eyes, but she didn't dare let them fall. That was the moment I stopped feeling fear. I stopped feeling anything. Inside me, something cold and pure took over. I bowed my head. Yes, sir, I'll run. Ernest smirked, satisfied. Good, you'll have a head start. Make it interesting. He turned to Garrett. Feed them light tonight. I want them hungry. Garrett grinned. Yes, sir. They walked away, laughing. Adelaide stayed a moment longer, staring at me, her lips quivering. I could tell she wanted to speak, but words failed her. When she finally turned and followed them, her white dress brushed the dirt like falling ash. I stood there for a long while, listening to the sound of their boots fade. Then I went back to the kennels. The hounds pressed against the bars, whining softly. They knew something was different. I crouched down beside Brutus and ran my fingers through his fur. Not tonight, I whispered. You ain't gonna hunt me tonight. When the sun began to fall, I prepared the meat. I cut it slow, steady, careful not to let my hands shake. I mixed in the herbs again, more this time. The sleeping death would slow their bodies for anyone but me. But that wasn't all. In a separate bowl, I added the second mixture, a scent lure, made from old blood and the oil I'd used to rub their collars. It carried my smell, soaked deep. I fed them one by one, whispering to each, remember me, remember my voice. By the time the last light faded from the sky, the plantation was crawling with tension. Lanterns burned in the big house, and I could hear laughter spilling out, drunk, cruel laughter. Garrett's voice cut through it. Let's see how fast the boy runs. The storm broke just before midnight. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the tin roof. Thunder rolled low and distant. It was almost poetic, the heavens themselves weeping for what was about to happen. Garrett stumbled down from the porch, rifle in one hand, lantern in the other. Get the dogs, boy, he slurred. I obeyed. I opened the kennel gates and led the hounds out, their muscles tense beneath wet fur, eyes glowing in the dark. They surrounded me, silent as shadows. Ernest stood under the porch, cigar glowing between his fingers. You got 5 minutes, boy. Run as far as you can. After that, the dogs come. I looked up at him, rain streaming down my face. Yes, sir, he grinned. Go on then. Let's see if them legs of yours are worth the food you've eaten. I turned and walked toward the edge of the woods. Each step sank deep into the mud. I could feel their eyes on my back. Ernest, Jasper, Garrett, even Adelaide, who stood frozen by the door, her hands pressed to her mouth. At the tree line, I stopped and looked back once. The lantern light flickered behind them, warped by rain. I saw Adelaide's face one last time before the darkness swallowed me. I ran, but I didn't run far. Deep in the woods, I stopped at the clearing I'd chosen days ago, a place where the trees grew close and the ground dipped into a hollow. I set the bait there, the bloody scent lure tied to an old log. The storm masked every sound as I crouched beside the roots, waiting. Then came the horn. It cut through the rain like a scream. The dogs howled in reply, a sound that used to terrify me. Now it made me smile. They were coming. The first to appear was Garrett, lantern swinging, rifle ready. Come on, boys, he shouted. Tear him to pieces. He didn't notice that the hounds didn't rush forward. They stood still, ears flat, eyes flicking toward me where I waited in the shadows. Go, Garrett roared, shoving Brutus. That's when I whistled 3 short notes, low and sharp. The hounds froze. Then, as one, they turned not toward the scent lure, not toward the woods, but toward Garrett. He blinked, confused. What the growl that rose from Brutus was deep enough to shake the air. Then Shade lunged. Garrett didn't even have time to scream before the pack was on him. The lantern fell, shattering, flames spilling into the mud. From the porch far behind, Ernest shouted, "Garrett, what the hell's going on?" I watched from the dark as the man who'd tormented us for years disappeared beneath teeth and fury. The rain washed the blood into the soil like ink soaking through parchment. When the dogs lifted their heads, they looked at me. Their eyes glowed gold in the stormlight. I whispered, "Good boys." Behind me, the horn blew again. The rest of them were coming. And this time, the hunt wasn't for me. The rain came harder after Garrett's screams faded. The sky split open, and thunder shook the trees, drowning the world in sound. I stood in the shadows of the woods, soaked to the bone, the scent of blood thick in the air. The hounds circled me, their breath steaming in the cold night, their eyes glowing like embers. They had done what I asked, and they were still hungry. The hunt had turned. Back at the house, I could see lanterns flaring and figures rushing toward the woods. Ernest's voice bellowed above the storm. "Garrett, Jasper, find that boy." I moved through the trees like a shadow, keeping low. The ground was slick, my clothes clinging heavy with rain, but my mind was sharp, every sense alive. The storm that had once frightened me as a child now felt like a shield, covering every sound, every step. The hounds followed close, silent except for their breathing. They knew who they belonged to now. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw Jasper on horseback, holding a rifle, his face twisted with fury. 2 other white men rode beside him, overseers from the neighboring plantation, both armed. Ernest stood on the porch with a lantern, barking orders, cigar clamped between his teeth. "Spread out," he roared. "Bring him back alive. I want to watch the dogs tear him slow." If only he knew. I waited until Jasper dismounted, shouting curses into the dark. The men spread wide through the trees, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies. I whistled once, low and steady. The hounds crouched, muscles tensing. When Jasper passed close enough for me to see the whites of his eyes, I whispered, "Now." They moved like shadows breaking apart. Shade hit him first, knocking him into the mud. The rifle fired wild, the sound deafening in the storm. The other 2 men turned, shouting, but before they could aim, Brutus and Mercy lunged. Lanterns crashed, glass shattered, and fire flickered across wet leaves. Jasper screamed a raw, high sound that didn't sound human anymore. I watched from behind a fallen tree, rain streaming down my face. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The sound of his screams filled the forest, mixing with thunder until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When it was over, the horses had fled, the lanterns had gone out, and all that was left were the hounds standing silent over the wreckage of what once hunted me. The house loomed in the distance, its lights glowing faintly through the rain. Ernest was still there, so was Adelaide. I started walking. The mud squelched beneath my boots, and the dogs padded behind me, quiet as ghosts. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper, a strange calm that came when all the pain of a lifetime gathered into one purpose. When I stepped into the open yard, Ernest finally saw me. "Well, I'll be damned," he spat, stepping forward, rifle in hand. "You got some nerve coming back here." His voice was steady, but I saw at the flicker of fear behind his eyes. He could see the hounds behind me, their fur matted dark, their teeth glinting in the lamplight. "Where's Garrett?" he demanded. "Where's my boy?" I didn't answer. He lifted the rifle, aiming it at my chest. "You answer me or I'll..." The dogs growled low and deep. Adelaide burst through the front door then, barefoot, her white dress soaked. "Father, stop," she screamed. "Please." "Get inside," he barked without looking at her. "This ain't your concern." She stood frozen on the porch, eyes wide. "You're going to kill him? After everything, after what you've already done?" Ernest's hand tightened on the trigger. "He's a murderer. Ain't no man can kill white folk and live." Something in me snapped then, not with anger, but with clarity. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "Don't," he snarled. "Stay where you are." I didn't. The dogs spread out in a half circle around me, eyes locked on him. The storm roared overhead, lightning flashing white across his face. I saw the sweat on his temple, the twitch in his finger. "Don't you take another step," he warned. I stopped just 10 feet away. "You fed me to your beasts," I said, voice calm. "Made me clean their filth, starve beside them, live in their chains. Now they feed on yours." His jaw clenched. "You think you can scare me, boy? I broke men stronger than you." He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the night. Pain tore across my shoulder, knocking me back. The dogs exploded forward before I hit the ground. Ernest fired again, but it was too late. They hit him like thunder. The porch shuddered beneath their weight. Adelaide screamed, stumbling back as her father fell, the rifle clattering beside him. His voice turned into gurgled curses, then silence. When it was over, I stood there breathing hard, blood soaking my sleeve. The rain hissed against the lanterns. Ernest Harding lay motionless, his cigar crushed into the mud. Adelaide fell to her knees beside him, sobbing, her hands shaking. Oh God, Father. I wanted to say something to tell her I hadn't planned for her to see this, that I hadn't meant to turn her world to ash, but what words could make sense of this night? She looked up at me, tears cutting through the mud on her face. Simon, what have you done? I stared at her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. What needed to be done? The hounds stood silent now, their fury spent. The fire from a broken lantern licked at the edge of the porch, sending thin smoke into the rain. She reached for me suddenly, grabbing my arm. You have to go. They'll come for you. The sheriff, everyone. I shook my head. Where would I run to? There's no place for men like me. Please, she begged. Go north. Find freedom. My father's gone. No one can stop you now. Freedom. The word sounded hollow. What was freedom after all? This. I looked down at the silver cross she'd given me, still hanging around my neck. It gleamed faintly in the lightning. I never wanted freedom, I said quietly. I wanted peace. She let go of me, her hands trembling. Behind us, the dogs began to whine softly, restless. The storm was easing now, the thunder moving farther away. I could feel the night thinning, dawn not far off. Adelaide stood slowly. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, but there was something else there too, understanding. What will you do now? She asked. I looked out across the dark fields, the world that had been my prison. I'll finish what's left. Then I turned away from her, calling softly to the hounds. They followed, obedient and silent, into the rain. Behind me, the house began to burn. The flames caught quick, crawling up the wooden walls, fed by wind and fury. The screams that rose from inside were not mine this time. I didn't look back. The rain fell steady, the dogs padding beside me as the fire painted the night behind us. The smell of smoke and blood mingled in the air, and for the first time in my life, the hounds walked free, and so did I. The sky was the color of dying embers when I reached the edge of the Harding plantation. The rain had slowed to a whisper, and the world smelled of smoke and wet soil. Behind me, the house that had ruled my life for 19 years burned like a pyre, its flames licking the heavens, turning night into blood-red light. The hounds walked beside me, Shade, Mercy, Brutus, and the others silent, their heads low. Their fur dripped with rain and ash, their eyes reflecting the firelight like torches. For years they had been the master's beasts, the monsters whispered about among the slaves. Now they were just tired creatures, same as me. The ground beneath my feet was soft and deep from the storm. Each step sank a little, leaving prints that filled slowly with muddy water. I kept walking, though I didn't know where the road would lead. Freedom wasn't something I'd ever seen with my own eyes. It had only ever been a dream passed in whispers between men too beaten to hope. But tonight, the chains felt lighter. When I looked back one last time, the flames had reached the upper rooms. I thought of Ernest Harding, his rage, his cruelty, his blood on the porch, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not sorrow, just a hollow stillness. Maybe that's what freedom really feels like at first. Emptiness. The wind carried the smell of charred wood, and beneath it, faintly, the scent of magnolia, the flowers Adelaide had always placed in the parlor window. I wondered if she was still alive inside that house, or if she had run before the fire took her too. I didn't know. I didn't want to. Some things are better left to the ashes. I walked until the plantation fields gave way to forest. The hounds followed me without command, their loyalty shifting from fear to something else, trust maybe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking behind anyone. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, I stopped. The rain had washed the blood from my clothes, but the stain remained in my memory. I sat on a fallen tree, my body aching, and watched the mist rise over the fields. I thought about my mother then. She had been gone for 14 years, buried in a patch of unmarked ground behind the smokehouse. Ernest had said she died from fever, but the others whispered that she'd been beaten after refusing his orders. I was too young to remember much, but I remembered her voice soft, full of songs that no one else sang. You ain't meant to live like them, she'd once told me. You was born with more in your soul than they can ever own. Those words had carried me through every whipping, every hungry night, every cruel order barked in my face. And now, sitting in the dawn light, I felt her presence again, faint but real, as if she was watching from somewhere beyond the fire and smoke. I did it, Mama, I whispered. I ain't their beast no more. The forest was still. Only the drip of rain from the trees answered. The hounds lay close, their breathing slow, their bodies finally at rest. For a long time, I just sat there. I thought of Garrett's sneer, of Jasper's laughter, of all the nights I spent cleaning blood and bone from the kennels while they feasted inside the big house. I thought of Adelaide too, how she had looked at me that last night, her eyes full of something I couldn't name. Pity? Love? Maybe both. Maybe neither. What I knew was this: I was alive, and they weren't. And life, for once, belonged to me. The sun rose higher, burning the mist away. I watched its light creep over the trees, turning everything gold. I had never really seen the sunrise before, never stopped long enough to look. It felt strange, watching the world wake up after such a night, like seeing God wipe the slate clean. I stood, stretching sore limbs. The hounds rose too, shaking off the damp. They were restless again, glancing toward the horizon as if they sensed something calling them. "You can go," I told them softly. "You're free now." They just stared at me, uncertain. "You don't owe me nothing," I said. "No chains, no master, no more blood." One by one, they began to move, first Shade, then Brutus, then the others. They padded off into the trees, disappearing among the shadows and light until I stood alone. The silence they left behind was heavy, but not lonely. I turned toward the north. Somewhere beyond these woods, there were men and women who had made it, who had followed the stars, crossed the rivers, reached places where no whip cracked in the morning air. I didn't know if I had the strength to join them, but I knew I couldn't go back. As I walked, the path narrowed, twisting through pine and oak. My shoulder throbbed where Ernest's bullet had grazed me, but the pain was just proof that I was still breathing. Each step felt lighter than the last. The sun climbed higher, breaking fully through the clouds. Birds began to sing, timid at first, then louder, as if the forest itself was waking from a nightmare. I walked toward the sound, my heart beating in rhythm with it. By midday, I reached a creek. The water was clear and cold, running quick over smooth stones. I knelt beside it, cupping my hands to drink. The reflection that looked back at me in the ripples was not the same boy who once fed the hounds scraps under the overseer's eye. My face was older now, harder, but my eyes were my mother's. I smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Then I saw something glinting downstream, a broken chain half buried in the mud. One end twisted and snapped. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. The metal was cold, but it felt light. I dropped it into the water and watched it sink, disappearing beneath the current. That's where it belonged. I walked on until the trees opened to a clearing. Wildflowers grew there, small and stubborn, swaying gently in the breeze. I sat among them, letting the sun warm my face. For the first time, there was no shouting, no barking, no crack of the whip, just peace. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a train whistle, a sound I'd only ever heard once before, carried by the wind. It was faint but real, and it called to something deep inside me. North. Always north. I stood again, shoulders straight, bloodied shirt clinging to my skin, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of earth, rain, and freedom. Whatever lay ahead, it was mine to walk. No master's orders, no chains, no hounds at my back, just the road, the wind, and the memory of fire behind me. I started walking again, and as I did, I whispered the same words I'd heard my mother sing when I was a boy, words I barely remembered, but they came back now like an old prayer. No more crying, no more pain. The morning's here, I rise again. And with each step, the weight of the past grew lighter, until it was just me and the dawn.